This episode is brought to you by DistroKid.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's installment of what we're calling Legends Amplified, with this week's featured artist being none other than the late great Ric Ocasek, legendary singer, songwriter, and guitarist for the Boston, Massachusetts new wave rock band, The Cars, as well as solo artist and multi-platinum producer. My trusted co-host Chris Fafalios and I dive deep into the origins of Ric's career, from his humble early 70s Midwest beginnings, kicking around the club circuit, to forming The Cars, releasing solo albums, and learning the best production tricks you can't put a price on, working alongside such notable greats as Roy Thomas Baker and Mutt Lange. And did you know Ric's last name is really pronounced Ocasek? Well, it is. Sadly, we lost Ric in 2019. He would have been 81 this year. And as Chris Fafalios mentioned, we both think Ric would still be rocking on stage if he were still here with us. So kick back and join us for Legends Amplified, Ric Ocasek.
Hey, hey, have you heard? Chris DeMakes a podcast. Hey, hey, have you heard? Chris DeMakes a podcast. Hey, hey, have you heard? Chris DeMakes a podcast. Hey, hey, have you heard? Chris DeMakes a podcast.
Well, hey, Chris, let's talk about a legend in my mind, an icon, Mr. Ric Ocasek for The Cars.
Let's do it. And let's address one thing right off the bat, Chris. My entire life, as long as I've known who he is, I've also called him Ric Ocasek. But then I went and watched a video of him introducing himself.
Hi, I'm Ric Ocasek, and I turn confusion into a virtue.
It's actually Ric Ocasek.
Yes. I've never heard anybody pronounce it Ocasek, but yeah, if you want to go with Ocasek, we can. I'm going to go with Ocasek because that's all I've ever heard it.
Okay.
Ric is of like Czech descent, and I think there was a T in front of the C, and I don't know if it was Ocasek or if the T was silent. I'm not sure, but I don't know. Probably in the introduction for this episode, Chris, I'm going to say Ocasek.
Okay, that's fine. You know, that's what I always called him, but I did see a video of him calling himself Ocasek. And Chris, I think it's especially cool that we're doing this episode this week because this week, had Ric still been alive, he would have been turning 81 this week that we're releasing this episode.
Yes, he passed away in 2019.
Yeah, that's right. And hey, man, there's a good chance, who knows, maybe he would have been touring and playing shows because I'll tell you, I just saw that, Rod Stewart and Billy Joel are touring together this year. Rod Stewart is 80 and Billy Joel was like 76. So there are guys, Paul McCartney, there are guys out there still doing it. So if Ric was still here today, who knows, maybe we could have went and seen him together.
That's right. Well, we're going to kind of do a career retrospective of Ric today. Everything from his songs with The Cars. We'll touch a little bit on his solo career as well as his producing career, which started in 1980. He was a busy, busy guy. I'll tell you what I love about Ric, and I dug for some dirt. I don't know if you did. I didn't just go to Wikipedia. I typed in, I've never heard one story about him being drunk and disorderly on drugs. His life fell apart, and I'm telling you why. The guy didn't do it. I know he had 3 marriages, and his marriages probably suffered due to his work schedule. Chris, this guy did not have a break. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but it was just, his career was one run-on sentence from the time he put his feet down.
Right. And I didn't know beforehand. I kind of assumed that Benjamin Orr wrote some of the Cars songs. No. It was Rick, maybe once in a while with a little help from, who was it, Greg Hawkes in the band?
Greg Hawkes, the keyboardist, correct.
Yeah, but it was all Rick, which is why on our songwriting podcast, we are focusing on Rick, even though everybody in the band were great, but we're going to focus on Rick.
Yeah, and we really didn't know what to call this segment. Of course, we've done the artist is no longer here, and Rick is no longer with us. But this wasn't just focusing on one song. This was going to, again, be a career retrospective. And, like I said, I don't think that there's much to be said in lieu of controversies with this guy. It's kind of like when I think someone asked Weird Al, when are you going to write a book? He's like, well, what would it be about? I didn't have any failed marriages, and I never crashed and burned. My life was happy. That doesn't sell books.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure that Rick had his ups and downs. Like you said, several marriages, and also, which we'll get to eventually, a band breakup that didn't seem very amicable.
No.
So he definitely had his peaks and valleys.
And what I will say about that is the ideas in a band, sometimes they come from one person. It's one seed that germinates, and that becomes what the band is. Now, does that take anything away from Benjamin Orr or Elliot Easton or any of the... I mean, Elliot Easton, he's talked in punk circles. Stephen Egerton, Descendants, absolutely loves Elliot Easton's playing. No one really sounded like him. He definitely had his own style. So I do believe while the band is certainly important in all situations, Rick wrote the songs. If you look at Rick's solo career, it wasn't as big as the Cars. So sometimes it's the sum of its parts.
Right. Yeah. He had a few peaks into the charts or whatever,
right.
a little bit into there. But yeah, it was the Cars. It was the sum of the parts that made the whole thing. And Rick's songs are a big part of that, believe me, but it is the magic, no pun intended, of the whole band coming together that made it happen. But Chris, before we get to the Cars, do you want to talk a little bit about where Rick came from, where this guy, nobody looked like Ric Ocasek. I will tell you that. He stuck out like a sore thumb. And it's not to say that he was like an ugly guy or something, but definitely pretty memorable looking guy.
Yeah, he was... just kind of this regular Joe. He has joked about his looks before. Mm-hmm. I always thought that if you put the makeup on him, he'd look like Alice Cooper. He kind of had that. He kind of had that thing going for him. But he dated supermodels, so what do I know?
Sure. Sometimes guy rock stars really have it easy a lot of times, I think, in that you can be very strange looking, but it's almost like, women are held to a standard of like,
absolutely,
that guys aren't. Mm-hmm. You'll see a guy who just based off of whatever, his personality or, I'm sure there are women this way too, but in general, women are held to these beauty standards that guys are not. So yeah, it's not surprising that gangly Ric Ocasek is dating supermodels. But yeah, I was surprised to learn some things about Rick's background, Chris. Born in Baltimore in 1944, moved to Cleveland when he was 16 because his father worked as an analyst for NASA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was moved around, and then he just, kind of got into his first band, started playing with guys, I guess, in the Columbus, Ohio area, where he hooked up with, was it Elliot Easton or was it Greg Hawkes at that time? He hooked up with one of those guys, and they were touring that circuit from Columbus all the way up into Michigan, Ann Arbor area, from what I understand.
Right. And Rick also did the Chris DeMakes of, he briefly attended college at Antioch and Bowling Green, but then he was like, no, music's where it's at. He met Benjamin Orr in Cleveland in 1965 after he saw Benjamin performing with his band, the Grasshoppers.
Well, who wears my socks? Who wears my socks? Who wears my socks? Girls wear my socks. Sister wears my socks. Sister wears my socks. Mother wears
But then it was a few years later in Columbus where the two began performing in and booking bands together. Chris, Ohio, not a place. I mean, of course, you think about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame being in Cleveland, but Ohio being a hotbed of music, it's not usually the first place that comes to mind, but there's a lot of great bands that have come out of Ohio. I think of like the Breeders. I think Guided by Voices are Ohio. Just lots of stuff throughout music history I see coming out of Ohio that is always surprising.
I want to say that Devo was from Ohio, but
Yes.
they always claimed Los Angeles, which is interesting because I always thought the Cars' early stuff kind of had a little bit of a Devo component to it, or vice versa, that new wave style. But, you know, the Midwest, as you know, has always been a hotbed for rock and roll. And even back then, if you look at history, Ohio, that whole circuit, there was bands. We talked to Rick Nielsen about this from Cheap Trick. They were touring that Midwest circuit from, you know, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. You know, I wrote here in my notes because I really started to churn and think about this. Led Zeppelin, that wasn't those guys' first band. Jimmy Page had played in the Yardbirds. John Paul Jones had done his whole thing. And here was Rick, you know, at that age, and every band does it. I did it. You know, most bands don't have the same four guys they started with in that garage. And here was Rick putting together pieces of this puzzle. You know, not all bands keep their very first lineup intact or hit it big straight out of the gate with their first band. They just don't. So here you are putting these pieces. I want to say they met Elliot Easton, the guitar player, when they got to Boston, because that's where they relocated. I believe he's a Boston guy. And it was at that time that they started gigging around there and cemented what became the first recordings of the Cars.
I don't know which guys. I guess it was maybe three of the guys formed a band called ID Nirvana in 1968, which is so funny because why put the ID on it? Obviously.
And I didn't know if that was a Freudian thing, Chris. I saw that too. Was it id Nirvana?
It was ID.
I
watched
ID.
some.
Okay.
Yeah, I watched a little mini documentary about the background of Rick, and it was ID Nirvana. I don't know why the ID, and I don't know why they weren't just Nirvana, because obviously Nirvana wouldn't come around for another 25 years or so. But that was in 1968, and it's so funny. I was looking around. I was like, can I find some music of these ID Nirvana? I don't know that it's out there to begin with, but searching for this with Nirvana in the name made it impossible to find. But I did find their next band, when Rick and Benjamin did move to Boston in the early 70s, they formed a band called Milkwood, which was very much a Crosby, Stills, and Nash type folk rock band.
We could be with me. Seems a spring ago was yesterday.
That's really interesting because I can't picture Benjamin or Ric Ocasek singing in that type of style or having any success with that because, you know, Rick's vocals are just very quirky. At times he almost had a Danny Elfman delivery. Devo again comes to mind. But if you go back to that first record, the Cars' self-titled album from 1978, I just hear a rock band. You know, that's what was there. Yeah, we had some synthesizer sounds, but it was just good straight up rock and roll. Someone who doesn't get mentioned, and I want to give a tip of the hat here to Dave Robinson, the drummer, percussionist, and backing vocals. He also played keyboards at some point in the band's tenure. Greg Hawkes is the keyboard player who also played guitar and was a background vocalist. He also played bass and saxophone in the early days. Benjamin Orr. Lead and backing vocals and keyboards. Benjamin sadly passed away in 2000. Elliot Easton, lead guitar and backing vocals, and of course Rick on lead and backing vocals, rhythm guitar, and keyboards. And I don't know, I'm assuming it was a label pull, Chris. I'm not sure how they got hooked up with a Roy Thomas Baker, which to me is a very interesting producer for them.
The thing that I notice a lot about the Cars, especially early Cars, is I heard this brought up about Red Hot Chili Peppers, like Blood Sugar Sex Magic album produced by Rick Rubin before, where it's like you're hearing the drums, a bass, a guitar, and a vocal. And not all the layers and layers and layers of stuff that you can build on a track. I feel like with the Cars too, I'm hearing these main tracks loud and clear. Everything's cutting through. Every instrument's cutting through without all the extra stuff. And that's the complete antithesis to Queen, really. I mean,
right.
I guess I could argue against myself, though, because Queen went over the top with the vocals a lot of times. But then if you think about a song like We Will Rock You, or, Another One Bites the Dust, these are kind of like stripped down songs. So I don't know if I'm arguing against my own point here.
No, I think that Roy Thomas Baker did a fabulous job capturing the band, what they sound like. And really, the band didn't evolve over their first couple records. The Cars, 78 self-titled release, Candy-O in 79, which we're going to get to in a minute, Chris. The output from this band in the first 5 years, they were releasing records like 8 months later from the previous one. Panorama in 1980 and Shake It Up in 81. The formula really didn't change with the band. It wasn't until Heartbeat City, of course, Mutt Lange, Robert John Mutt Lange, famous for producing Def Leppard, Shania Twain, he came into the fold, and now you got these huge vocals, now you got these layers and everything, which we'll get to in a bit. But, Ric Ocasek is one of those people, and I wanted to lead with him, Chris, and I think I mentioned this to you a little bit because he kind of embodies, when we've used the term on here, a lifer, but this guy, he was just, from the time he started his music career, he was insanely busy. In between all these records that the Cars were doing, he was doing a solo record on the opposite schedule of the Cars, touring that record. He started producing a band called Suicide in 1980. That was his first production. And he produced records all the way up until 2015, 4 years before his passing. But let's talk a little bit. When did you first get into the Cars? First remember them?
It's one of those bands where I can't remember the first time I heard the Cars, but I was born in 1980. So the Cars music has been playing in one way or another throughout my entire life. The birth of MTV, there was a TV with MTV on it in my house as a little kid. The radio around me, these songs, they sound like standards to me. It's one thing that sticks out to me about these songs, Chris. All these hits, especially the early hits, there's like this main riff. There's like a main guitar riff, a main synth riff, and this top line melody vocal hook that brings you in. And something that really grabs me about all these songs is I always think, and I know what you're going to say in response to this, I always think, man, I could have wrote that. Anybody could have wrote that. And what's your response to that, Chris?
But you didn't.
Yeah, right. Rick did.
Rick did, I know.
And, thank goodness he did. These songs are classics. But they don't feel like they're overthought. They feel like what we hear a lot of times, people come on Chris DeMakes a podcast and say like, hey, I wrote this in 15 minutes. It was an idea that popped into my head, something I worked out, and then we just built a whole song around it. Not like overbaked.
Yeah, well, they were incredibly simple pop songs, but the band and the creativeness and just when everybody added their own color, when they added their own ingredient, it became the Cars. I dare you to find a band that sounds like them. I've never heard one that you could say, wow, that sounds just like the Cars.
Yeah, I hear some of the Cars in some of the bands that Rick would later go on to produce.
Oh, Motion City.
Motion City soundtrack. Weezer. Sure. Of course I hear the Cars and Weezer. So it's funny that the only bands I can think of that sound like the Cars are bands that hired Rick to produce them.
Think about it. I truly think that Rick was a genius, but here he was rubbing elbows with Roy Thomas Baker and Mutt Lange. I mean, what a better crash course in musical production could you take from those two guys? The Cars' first record came out on June 6, 1978. Again, produced by Roy Thomas Baker. The engineer on the record was Jeff Workman, Chris, who did a ton of stuff in the 70s. He was a well sought after engineer, worked with Black Sabbath. Just When I Needed was one of the 3 singles released from the record. The lead vocal on that was Benjamin Orr, even though the song was written by Ric Ocasek, and their 2 voices very, very similar.
Dude, I would not have been able to tell the difference. If you would have played me 6 Cars songs and said like, who's singing what song, I wouldn't have been able to pick it out. They are very similar, and I read up on that, and basically people were like, yeah, they played music together for all these years since they were basically kids, or college kids at least, and you take on some of the affectations of the person that you're playing with. It makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I've talked to you about this before, where I'll go back and listen into early Less Than Jake records. We'd flip-flop doing harmonies. I can't tell if it's me or Roger.
Sure.
And that's exactly kind of what you're talking about. The second single was My Best Friend's Girl. And all these songs, as you said, they're just staples at FM radio. To this day, you will hear these songs. And of course, Good Times Roll. Both aforementioned songs were sung by Ric. I want to give honorable mention to You're All I've Got Tonight, Bye Bye Love, and Moving in Stereo. Moving in Stereo has kind of become one of those cult hits. It just shows up in weird movies sometimes.
Dude, and 2, I want to mention, this is their first album. So they're just on the way up here. That album only reached number 18. Just What I Needed, My Best Friend's Girl, and Good Times Roll, all those songs charted in the Hot 100. Not in the top 20, just in the Hot 100. But Chris, 2 songs, Just What I Needed and Good Times Roll, both of those songs in recent years, I wish I could think exact. I mean, Just What I Needed's been used in so many commercials over the year. I feel like Target commercials during the holidays, or like whatever, just what I needed, just what you needed for your gift giving season or whatever. These songs lend themselves to commercials so much, and Good Times Roll.
Oh yeah.
Those are such commercial regular songs.
In the early days, it was really split up too. On the first record, Benjamin Orr sang 4 out of the 9 album tracks, the rest of them sung by Ric. And keyboardist Greg Hawkes has writing credit with Ric on one song, that's Moving in Stereo, which there's a lot of trippy keyboard effects in that one that I bet it was just so much that Ric was like, yeah, without you and these sounds, this song wouldn't have been.
Right. It's just impressive. And we've talked about this debut album thing before, where it's like some of these songs were actually songs that they had written in their, because they had all these like bands, these short-lived bands where it was like, oh, this member joined. Oh, now we grabbed this guy. The Cars were sort of like the combination of all of them. But some of these songs were from the last band they had before they were called the Cars, that was called Richard and the Rabbits.
Yes.
And, some of these became Cars songs. But my point being that you have your whole career up until your debut album to work on, to write these songs, to play them live. So you live test them out. So it makes sense that you'd have a lot of like what are considered classic Cars songs on their debut album.
Right. And remember, this was the 70s. So Van Halen, their first couple of records, they were playing live. Well, you only had 9, 10 slots maybe on a record back then. So you put your best songs, what you think are your best songs forward. A lot of times you have great songs left over for album 2 and album 3. Not so much these days, it seems. It's, bands work up to that first record and it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do for record number 2? Which record number 2 for the Cars was called Candy-O, released in 1979, June 2nd. Less than a year later, 361 days to be exact, from their first album. Yes, released. Not recorded. That was released.
What's crazy about that is didn't they have 6 singles from the first album? They had the 3 that hit the charts, but they also, I don't know if those other 3 were singles.
Well, no, and the other 3, it's interesting. The Cars remind me, and we've talked about the record from Boston. There's other records back then where They called them album-oriented rock. I don't know what exactly that meant, but all the songs kind of were potentially singles. You hear them all at some time, which You're All I've Got Tonight and Bye Bye Love, certainly we've heard those on FM radio. But there was 3 singles on Candio. The first one was Let's Go. Again, Benjamin Orr led off.
Let's go. I like the nightlife, baby.
Hey everybody, we got to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors, but we'll be right back with this Legends Amplified episode about Ric Ocasek.
Join Stephen Page and his friends and family at the Stephen Page Summer Camp for several days of music, laughs, and community in the beautiful Catskill Mountains of New York State from June 30th to July 4th, 2025. Whether you are a musician or an enthusiastic fan, SPSC is designed to provide an inspirational and interactive experience, offering the opportunity to truly take a step beyond backstage. There, you'll write songs, hear stories, make friends, and create memories. There'll be workshops, Q&As, performances, comedy, fireworks, and the chance to sing in a camp-wide choir at the closing concert. This event is all-inclusive. There's a wide range of packages to choose from tent camping to shared rooms to private cabins. There's something for everyone. Scholarships are available. This event is presented by Music Masters Collective, a 501c3 not-for-profit. Their organization is funded by a combination of registration fees, grants, and sponsorships. In addition, the organization accepts scholarship donations, 100% of which are distributed directly to individuals seeking financial aid. Spots are extremely limited, so register today at www.stephenpagesummercamp.com/DeMakes. Looking to elevate your music career? DistroKid is a digital music distribution service that enables musicians to distribute their music to online stores and streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, Amazon, Tidal, and many more. DistroKid collects earnings and payments, sending them to you, the artist. With DistroKid, artists unlock a world of possibilities. From easily paying collaborators with splits to securing your music with DistroLock, DistroKid covers all bases. Plus, you can promote your releases with Hyperfollow and create eye-catching visuals with a Spotify Canvas generator, all for free. But that's not all. Introducing the DistroKid app, now available on iOS and Android. Artists can manage their releases, view streaming stats, and withdraw earnings, all from the palm of their hand. And for those looking to perfect their sound, check out Mixia. With its simple interface and customizable mastering options, artists can make their music sound polished and professional within minutes. And don't forget about Instant Share, DistroKid's newest feature. Share large files securely with collaborators, producers, and more, ensuring your music streams at the highest quality. Ready to take your music to the next level? Download the DistroKid app and explore their suite of tools today. Plus, listeners can enjoy 30% off their first year by visiting distrokid.com/VIP/DeMakes. That's distrokid.com/VIP/DeMakes.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase of 16 weeks, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnn. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Any vehicle can take you places, but why stop there? The Alfa Romeo Tonale combines luxurious Italian design and electrifying performance to make every mile a masterpiece and every arrival unforgettable. When precision meets instinct and power moves with purpose, you never have to stay in a lane. Experience a world without limits in the Alfa Romeo Tonale plug-in hybrid. Tap the banner to learn more. Alfa Romeo is a registered trademark of FCA Group Marketing SPA, used with permission.
Ready for your next adventure? KLM Royal Dutch Airlines brings you Real Deal Days, your chance to uncover real adventures and create real memories. Taste the real Amsterdam, explore the real Barcelona, and discover the real Johannesburg, along with many more destinations around the world. Secure your real deal today and seize the moment with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. Restrictions apply. See terms and conditions at klm.com.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Your data is like gold to hackers. They're selling your passwords, bank details, and private messages. McAfee helps stop them. Secure VPN keeps your online activity private. AI-powered text scam detector spots phishing attempts instantly. And with award-winning antivirus, you get top-tier hacker protection. Plus, you'll get up to $2 million in identity theft coverage, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed, for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free Second Look review. Second Look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
And now back to the show.
So here Rick writes these songs. He sings a lot of them, but from the first two records, the first two lead-off singles, the other guy sings.
I think that's cool, and I don't know if this was the thought or not, Chris, but I have this thought within my own band. Look, a lot of times whoever writes the song, whoever's the primary songwriter in the song ends up singing it, but if I write a great song, I'd almost rather someone else sing it because then I can just enjoy being the songwriter of it and not focus so much when I listen to it on my vocal performance, which could be great, but I'm always going to hear those things where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm singing this good or not. So there may have been an element of like, hey, this song's great and I like the way you sing it, and I like not having the ego about the song. It's like,
and and I think that they just kind of worked that way from the get-go. I'll talk about Less Than Jake for a second again. You know, JR writes these incredible songs, and I've sang a couple of them, and
I will go on record as saying that I just can't do it justice like he does. But Roger and I are the voices of the band,
Right.
to give someone a lead spot, and that's not an ego thing from Roger or I, but really cool that he let off. I think that's great. The second single, It's All I Can Do, was also sung by Benjamin Orr. And then the third single, Double Life, which not a great song in my opinion, sung by Ric Ocasek. I thought Dangerous Type was a better choice of single, also sung by Ric. All the songs on Candio were Ric compositions. This album charted the US at number 3, the UK at number 30, Canada at number 4, and Australia at number 7. All those were higher than the first record, which led into Panorama from 1980, August 15th to be exact, 14 months after Candio. Roy Thomas Baker returns to produce the record, but we have a change in engineer to Ian Taylor on this album. All Ric compositions.
And Chris, one thing that you failed to mention about that last album, so they're on the rise at this point because that album did peak at number 3 now. So they're going up. And also, Let's Go was the band's first top 20 single. So they're on the up and up. But now with this next album, Panorama in 1980, now it's a little step down because it only had one top 40 hit, Touch and Go, and it peaked at number 5. So down, its peak was a couple spots down, and the critical praise of it was not very high. Rolling Stone called it an out-and-out drag.
It's a bland album. Have you heard Panorama?
I put on Touch and Go, and I'm like, yeah, I think I know this song.
It's touch and go. Touch and go.
Yeah, it was kind of a paint by numbers Cars record. I didn't know about it. So the next record they did in 81 was Shake It Up, and that's when I became familiar. In 1981, I was about to be 8 years old, and radio was my go-to. Didn't even have MTV at that point. It wasn't probably till later I saw the Shake It Up video. But it's funny, in researching this, Panorama to me was the dud in their catalog, but it was actually Shake It Up that performed less than what Panorama did on the charts. I had absolutely no idea what that. Shake It Up was also produced by Roy Thomas Baker, engineered by Ian Taylor, and that was only 13 months after Panorama. And to back up to that record, Touch and Go was the first single, sung by Ric. Don't Tell Me No was a song sung by Benjamin Orr. Another song sung by Ric was called Gimme Some Slack. US charts, number 5, Canada number 10, Japan number 69, Australia number 19. And Shake It Up, to my recollection, I might have been driving down the road and heard Just When I Need It or something in my dad's car, but Shake It Up was the first Cars song I remember hearing, and I loved it. I had the 45. I remember skating at the skating rink to Shake It Up.
Those stats you just read, those were for the Panorama or the Shake It Up album?
Those were for the Panorama record.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Shake It Up is the next album. This is the one where they purchased their own studio in Boston and named it Synchro Sound and recorded that album there. So the Shake It Up album, which we're about to talk to, that was their 4th album in 3.5 or 4 years?
That's correct. Yes.
Wow.
And now, back then, here was the thought. There was what were known as, and some of the listeners may have heard me say before, development deals. So you'd get $100,000 on the first record. Your budget would go to $250,000 for the second record if it panned out and performed well enough. Then you'd get the next advance, and then they'd give you the $750,000 advance. That'd be the fourth record. Well, as a young band, you want to, every year when that contract comes up, you want to get that next record going, okay? That doesn't exist anymore, okay? The CEO of Spotify isn't giving us a bunch of money every month to go record. Go record our records. But Shake It Up, that was
Coming in, Chris, around the era of MTV. MTV premiered in 1981. Shake It Up was released November, I believe, of that year. The U.S. charts was number 9 for this record. It performed under what Panorama did. Canada, number 7. Australia, number 20. Shake It Up was the first single. Rick sang that one. He also sang Since You're Gone and Victim of Love. Think It's Over. Benjamin Orr sang that one. And I'm Not the One was also sung by Rick. 5 singles from Shake It Up, which now led into their biggest record.
Well, before we talk about that, though, Chris, we do have to say that you mentioned the birth of MTV at this point. So now music videos really have to be taken into consideration with every single. But also, after this album, after this marathon of album after album after album after album, the band did, after their 1982 tour for the Shake It Up album, they took a 2-year break and the members worked on solo albums. And that's when Rick released what I believe was his debut solo album, Beatitude.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which his single from that was a song called Jimmy Jimmy.
Gotta get some kicks instead. Just sitting around thinking about what's wrong with everything in your life.
Did you know this song, Jimmy Jimmy?
I didn't. I've heard the song. My cousin actually had this record back in the day, and it sounded like the Cars, kind of, sort of, but because it was Rick singing, but nothing grabbed me from it. Again, a band sometimes is the sum of their parts. And before we go any further, you know, I've done this previously, and for this episode, I specifically went, Chris, and looked for video evidence that the Cars existed as a live band. There's Live Aid, there's a couple clips here and there. There's not a lot of it. And I got to thinking, why is that? You know, you look at back in the day, it was a commitment to get video equipment in to record bands. You had to conceal it, you had to hide it, all kinds of things. Van Halen got shot. There's a lot of early videos of him. He was a guitar virtuoso. David Lee Roth was a good-looking guy. Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant. The Cars were just 5 regular guys, you know, and maybe that came into play as to why you don't see a lot of videos from the band.
Yeah, I guess now that you mention it, the only live videos I really watched of them were their music videos where they're kind of playing live in the music videos.
Right.
And for being what you're calling just a bunch of regular looking guys, first of all, Ric Ocasek, not very regular looking. And also their music videos did end up becoming a big memorable thing about them too. Or at least they were down to play the game, because Chris, I recently watched that Yacht Rock documentary on HBO that came out a few months ago. And part of that was that some of these, what we call yacht rock now, they didn't call themselves yacht rock. That term didn't exist until the mid 2000s. But a lot of those bands, they didn't want to play the music video game. They were musicians and they were there to make music, not to look pretty, you know?
Right.
And that was part of what became the downfall of that entire style of music, was the music video. But the Cars were down to play a little bit, especially when we're talking about this Heartbeat City album that we're going to talk about now.
Absolutely. You know, and Heartbeat City was the longest break between records. It was about 2.5 years. It was released on March 13th, 1984, right in the sweet spot of MTV. It had been 2.5 years since Shake It Up. It took 6 months to record this record. They worked with Robert John Mutt Lang, 6 singles on this album, and the videos were classic. You Might Think had that fly buzzing around.
Yep.
I remember the Magic video. They were all out by a pool, kind of cheesy by today's standards.
Dude, that Magic video, he walks across the pool, like across the water, and everyone's amazed. Yeah, they won Video of the Year for one of the music videos at the VMAs. What? I got to see which one it was. I thought I made a note of it.
I think it was You Might Think. I believe that was the video that won the award. I'm almost certain that was the one.
It was You Might Think, right?
Yes.
It was
yes.
at the best video of the year at the VMAs in 1984, right?
Yeah,
Which one is that? Which one's the You Might Think video?
Well, a lot of superimposed stuff. I want to say there was like a fly buzzing around or something.
Okay.
It's been a long time since I actually watched that particular video. The first single was You Might Think, sung by Rick. The second single, Magic, was also sung by Rick. Drive was the third single, The Ballad. Very different song for Cars. And I had heard that Mutt Lange had something to do with this or wanted to offer this maybe even later on to Shania Twain, but there was other people that were interested in Drive. I can't remember who else was, but very different song for the band. Haunting. The vocals haunting in that song.
That's my favorite Cars song.
You can't go on thinking nothing's wrong. Who's gonna drive you home tonight?
I didn't know that what helped that song catch on so hard was they used it at Live Aid in 1985. They showed a music video that was kind of all about the famine in Ethiopia, like set to that song. They showed it at Wembley, and that was like what exposed people to that song and like sending up the charts.
Yeah, well, it can't be understated. And I've said this before with certain bands. This was just the height of MTV, and they were in everybody's living room. You got to not only put a sound to a band, you got to see their faces as well. Hello Again was the lead-off track from this record. Such a cool song. Lots of different samples and things. Rick sang that song. What is also of note for this album, Chris, is that drummer Dave Robinson, he is credited with drums and Fairlight programming. Okay,
the Fairlight.
What's cool about that is that here was the drummer that like said, okay, you're going to take the drumsticks out of my hands, but I'm still the drummer. I want to be programming this. I hear where the beats lie, but this is where the technology is. This is the sound of today. You got to trust Mutt Lange. I mean, his reputation precedes him. This album was huge for the band. It was their opus, I would call it. 6 singles, the 5th being Why Can't I Have You, sung by Rick, and Heartbeat City, the title track, sung by Rick, was the last song, which also, that was interesting. And I would notice things like this that maybe no one else would back in the day, stuff that I always called useless knowledge that comes to fruition here on the show. But Heartbeat City was listed on my cassette as Jackie was the name of the song, which it's about a girl named Jackie in the lyrics. That's the subject. Other cassettes, it was Heartbeat City, and subsequent pressings, that's also been Heartbeat City. So it was probably called Jackie on a track listing somewhere in the studio, and the record label went with that. But U.S. Billboard number 3, U.S. rock albums number 1, UK at 25, Canada at number 5. And this record, was toured up until probably 85, because that's when they did Live Aid was 85. So that's when they did Live Aid. And then Rick had another solo record. This Side of Paradise came out in 1986. His biggest solo single was from this album. It was called Emotion in Motion. The video got regular play on MTV.
Emotion in motion. Magical potion. Your emotion in motion.
Prior to this, in between that, the Cars released a greatest hits record, and arguably one of my favorite Cars songs is called Tonight She Comes. You familiar with that one?
Yeah, I put it on and I knew it.
In my mind, why does she keep me hanging on the line?
So that was just a single song that they added to the greatest hits album?
Rick had written it presumably for This Side of Paradise, the record that came out in 86. But
his solo album.
He had written it for that project, but they wanted to, and this was getting very popular in the 80s, and it continues to this day, add an extra track for incentive to buyers. It's like, I've heard all these songs, but they're all on one record now and there's an extra song, which ended up being Tonight She Comes, another MTV staple. Rick was still producing all through this time. He did a record for Bad Brains in 1983 and other stuff, which we'll get to in a little bit. They had a little bit of a hiatus. I say hiatus. Rick did the solo record, and then they came back in August of 87 to do a record called Door to Door. And this was kind of like the nail in the coffin for the Cars. They broke up not too long after this. Nothing really memorable on this record. It stalled at number 26 on the U.S. charts. Again, all songs written by Rick. To go back to Heartbeat City real quick, Chris, all the songs were written by Rick except It's Not the Night, co-written by Greg Hawkes. That song was not a hit, and again, makes me wonder why he got credit on like 2 songs in all of the Cars' career.
You know what else is pretty interesting to me, Chris, that I wouldn't have guessed is the Cars never had a number 1 song. Think about all the goofy one-hit wonders that went to number 1, all the names you would never remember again. Like, what is that song that's a number 1 song? Drive was their biggest song, and it only hit number 3. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at, as you would say. But still surprising they never had a number 1.
I made a note of that, and it's surprising on one hand, and it's not surprising on the other. And let me hit you with this. So the album was huge, made it up U.S. Billboard to number 3. That's a huge accomplishment. But look who they were going up against in the summer of 1984, Chris. Van Halen, Michael Jackson, Bryan Adams, Prince, Madonna, Huey Lewis, Tina Turner.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. Right. I left out a couple. Phil Collins, John Mellencamp, Bruce Springsteen, Madonna. Did I say Madonna?
Yeah, right.
So, and for 5 guys that weren't good-looking rock stars, man, they were in the wrong decade then, right? The 80s were huge.
Yeah, I'm feeling a real kinship with the Cars. Once again, I think Rick's pretty memorable looking, but the rest of the band, I don't know what those guys look like or anything. And
no. Yeah. I mean, Benjamin Orr I did, because outside of the Cars, he had a pretty big song around 1987, not to be confused with the Chicago song, but he had a song called Stay the Night.
Stay the night. Don't say you don't know. Stay the night.
I don't think I knew that one.
Yeah, it was a MTV hit. It was the biggest hit outside. It might even perform better than Emotion, Rick's biggest outside of the Cars solo song. But pretty big song. Couple more things I'd like to touch on. The rest of Rick's solo output. He did a record called Fireball Zone in 1991. Quick Change World in 93. Another record called Negative Theater in 1993, but that was in Europe only. And I think that maybe they changed the title for it for Europe. But then I went back and looked, and Negative Theater was like a collection of stories that Rick had put together in the early 80s. It was meant to be a book or a project that didn't seem to materialize. He did a record called Troubleizing in 1997, and his last solo album was Nexterday in 2005. And want to get into his production career a little bit. And let's keep in mind, okay, between everything he had, the first 6 years of the Cars were insane. Probably insane all the way up to 87 for Rick, because he was producing some great records around this time. Going back to 1980, and I hadn't heard of this band. That was his first production, was a record by a band called Suicide. He did Romeo Void, a record by them called Benefactor in 1982. Bad Brains, Rock for Light. And this is just some selected productions from Rick's career. Weezer, the Blue Album in 1994.
That's a big one.
Let's talk about that for a second, because not to take anything away from Rivers Cuomo, but would that record have sounded like it did? Would it have performed had they had some producer that threw a bunch of reverb and big 80s drums and said, hey, let's bring some keyboards in and some horn players or whatever else? I guess we'll never know, but what do you think?
I think it was a great decision for sure. I don't know if the band made the decision or if DGC, the label that came out on, if someone there put that together, like, oh, with your sound, if you guys worked with Rick, this will be magic. You know, I don't know how that came about. I would like to assume that Weezer themselves were fans of the Cars and were like, oh, this would be perfect.
Yeah, because I don't think he would be a go-to choice in the early 90s of a producer, but it definitely worked out for those guys. He produced The Gray Race by Bad Religion. Thoughts on that record?
It wasn't my favorite Bad Religion album. I like that song, Going for a Walk. I think it's just called A Walk from that album.
Walk.
But I was a big Stranger Than Fiction guy, and I think that was the follow-up to it. I think that was the next album that came out.
No, Stranger Than Fiction came out in 94. That was the record before Gray Race.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That Gray Race was the next album after Stranger Than Fiction.
Yep.
And I don't know. Well, as far as Bad Religion albums go, first of all, I didn't know that Rick produced it.
Yeah, you know, there's some bands, what are you going to do as a producer? Well, how else are you going to produce Bad Religion?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're not going to be bringing in congos and backup singers. So I think sometimes, which goes back to Weezer. Did Weezer sound like that when they were cutting demos, or did Rick make them sound like that? And we'll truly never know that. Not a Surf, High Low, he produced in 96. He did a record by D-Generation called No Lunch in 98. He did 2 tracks on Rocksteady from 2001, from No Doubt, Don't Let Me Down, and Platinum Blonde Life. Le Tigre, This Island in 2004. Motion City Soundtrack, Even If It Kills Me from 2007. Rick produced 5 songs. He also did, I didn't know this, Chris, he did the Weezer record, Everything Will Be All Right in the End from 2014.
Yeah, I don't even really know that album, but that was towards the end of Rick's life.
2014.
So that was 20 years after the Blue album came out.
And Rick's last production credit was from 2015. It was a band called The Cribs. The record was called For All My Sisters. Rick did that record.
That band's awesome. I don't know if you've ever listened to them, but my buddy Paul...
I have not.
My buddy Paul loves that band, and that's a band, I don't think it's that album, but it was one of those bands where you hear every instrument really loud and clear, you know? There's no doubt that this is just a rock band in a room. It's a very cool band. Hey, Chris, one thing that I want to go back to real quick is the breakup of the Cars. And did you read up a little bit on like what caused that?
Well, I don't know exactly. I do want to hear from you. I know you delved into that a bit, and I would say that it would have to be jealousies. I would also think that, again, Rick didn't just have money coming from all his Cars royalties, but he was producing a lot. Besides the minor hit that Benjamin Orr had, I mean, besides touring, and I don't know what their split was with merchandise, these guys had to work, which we'll get to what you found out in a second. But in the meantime, around from 2005 to 2007, they formed, the rest of the guys without Rick formed a band called the New Cars with Todd Rundgren on vocals.
I didn't know about that.
Yes.
Wow.
They released 1 live album with 2 songs on that record that were quasi New Cars songs. One of them was an old composition of Todd Rundgren's, and I think the other one might have been an original or a cover, but it kind of came and went. It was, they were called the New Cars. They tried going out. They weren't getting very good slots. I think they were trying to do like the summer tour thing, opening up for Heart and, Def Leppard or Boston or something, but that only lasted 2 years. And not sure if you knew that the Cars did one final record with the full band, with Rick, in 2011 called Move Like This.
Yeah, I saw that, but I didn't listen to it. Have you listened to it?
I listened to the first single when it came out. It was pretty forgettable from what I remember. It was called Sad Song. That was the only single from the record. It was produced by Rick and a guy named Garrett Jackknife Lee, who I'm unfamiliar with, but I went and looked at his output as a producer. He has done quite a few things. But what do you know about the initial breakup? Again, I'm surmising that jealousies, and Rick's living in Malibu, and these guys are trying to figure out where their next lunch is coming from.
I don't know. I would assume that all the guys did pretty well. I didn't read anything about like money sort of jealousies, but what I did see was that there were some creative differences. I did read a little bit that Benjamin had a little penchant for drinking. I did see that was part of it, but also the creative differences in that. Now, at first, when I heard this, I'm like, oh man, it kind of made me think that maybe Rick was a little bit of an asshole. Like Benjamin wanted to contribute songs, but Rick was shutting him down. And I'm like, okay, you're a band, you work together, and I get it. You have a primary songwriter, whatever. I don't know the inner workings. Maybe they were bad songs. Well, then I read this and I was like, oh, this was Rick talking about it from an interview. Benjamin was trying to bring songs that he wrote with his girlfriend. Like, what? Like, nothing against, co-writing with someone, but you want to write songs with your girlfriend for the band? I mean, I don't care who it is. You're just bringing this stranger into the fold. Like, this isn't, just because it's your girlfriend doesn't mean that she gets to write songs for the band.
Okay.
I was like, no, I'm completely on Rick's side in this argument. Plus, Rick said the songs weren't, basically he said, I couldn't get into the lyrics. The songs weren't good.
Listen, and unless you're just a close-minded jerk, when you're trying to create a record, someone like Rick, you're listening for songs. If the girlfriend wrote a song with you and it's awesome, hey, but it sounds to me like the material wasn't there, and so now this guy gets offended because his composition isn't included with his girlfriend.
Well, dude, I mean, could you imagine if I just can't imagine a world where somebody in my band would bring their significant other. I'm not saying it's because it's a woman. I'm saying it's just anybody, their significant other. If you were a band of women and some member of the band wanted to bring their boyfriend to write songs with them, be like, what? What are you talking about?
Doesn't John Lennon have a corner on that market, though?
Oh, that is true. That is true. And that didn't work out too well for him either. I mean, I guess it worked out all right for everybody in that band. But, that just seemed weird. It's like, I don't know.
Well, listen, Chris, this has been a lot of fun. For everybody listening, if you're in our Facebook group, go and leave us some comments. Let us know who you'd like us to spotlight. What legend, who's here or who's no longer here that we could give a career retrospective, and maybe we'll delve into it.
Yeah. Chris, what's your favorite Cars song?
Wow. Oh, I got a soft spot for Bye Bye Love. I just love that song from the first record. I love You Might Think. I love Hello Again, Shake It Up. They have so many good songs. And the interesting thing about the Cars, and I'll tread lightly. I don't want to come off as sounding like I don't love the band, but I had Heartbeat City, but I never really had their records. I never really drove down the road and knew every song. I was kind of like a hits guy with that band. I really believe that most of the songs they released as their singles were the best songs in that band. I don't believe that they had, their album tracks are better than the singles. I'm not going to buy into that theory, but great band, man. I just, overall, and it's not just the band, it's what, and why we spotlighted Rick. It's what he brought to the table. He was the creator. He wrote the songs. He produced outside of it. He did solo records. He got divorced 3 times. Ric Ocasek.
Yeah, right. And I think he's pretty inspiring when you feel like you have writer's block or you feel like you need to write some sort of crazy, complex, impressive thing, especially when you're in a rock band. Sometimes you feel like it's a competition and you want to impress the other bands or something. Sometimes all you need is a solid riff, a catchy hook, and a great lyric, and you can build a whole song around that. You don't have to overthink it. And I think that's what I take away from Ric Ocasek as a songwriter.
Absolutely. Well, hey, head over to chrisdemakes.com and join our Patreon. Yes, it's awesome. We've had it for a couple months now. Thanks to everybody who is still with us over at Supporting Cast. You can stay there, but if you'd like to hop over, as many people have, please head over to chrisdemakes.com and sign up. Lots of great stuff.
Hell yeah. We like putting a lot of stuff on there, and it allows us to continue making the podcast, and you get bonus episodes every week, unedited videos of the episodes, early releases of new episodes. We're really trying to foster that community over there because it's important to us being able to make this show. If you enjoy this show, go check it out at chrisdemakes.com.
Yep, and once again, head over and join our Chris DeMakes a Podcast Facebook group. It is awesome, as well as go give us a follow on Instagram, the Chris DeMakes a Podcast page over there. Chris puts up a lot of cool videos, all good stuff. So yeah, once again, this has been a lot of fun. Mr. Ric Ocasek, please rest in peace.
Bye, my love. Bye, my love.
Hey, what's up? This is Blake Weiland. I'm the host of the Tone Mob Podcast. It's a show where I interview guitar people about guitar stuff. We talk about their pedals, their amps, their accessories, their preferences, all that stuff, as well as a healthy dose of whatever comes up. Topics have ranged from aliens to addiction and anywhere in between. Oh yeah, and pizza. We're definitely going to be talking about pizza. So get the show wherever you're listening to this podcast at. Just search The Tone Mob in your search bar and it will pop right up. Come join us. We're having a lot of fun. Thanks for checking it out.
Welcome to us talking about our podcast for a minute.
What's the name of that podcast?
That's Axe to Grind. And right now you're going to be getting a little taste of it, right down to the shaking microphone and all.
And my name's Bob.
And my name's Patrick. And usually we're joined by Tom.
Tom's the best. Tom has a real grown-up job that requires him to be at work, but we talk about decidedly not so grown-up things like
hardcore music and things that people that like hardcore music tend to like.
So that could be the latest shows, revisiting classic material, talking about the new classics, all the little dorm room nonsense that you imagine from niche music podcasts that you either love, want to love, or hate.
Yeah, imagine all the emotions that you have towards a genre that has impacted your life, and then condense them down to an hour to 2 hours a week.
So triangulate your speakers, think about jumping off the bed, singing along, dancing like an idiot, and listen to Axe to Grind Podcast.